Hello and thanks for joining me. Today I've come down to the river estuary at Aberffraw on Anglesey. Now this beautiful sandy beach that stretches out across the bay here is the closest bit of coast to where I live as the crow flies. About a mile and a half, something along those lines, and we're just along the coast from the church in the sea. Give you an idea of where I am. Now the lockdown in Wales continues slightly more stringently than it does in England at the moment. We are allowed out a couple of times a day now, but what we're also allowed to do, and the reason I'm doing about half an hour or so photography, is that you're now allowed to undertake activities incidental to your exercise, such as, and I quote from the Welsh Government website, sitting on a bench and having something to eat. So I figured half an hour with a camera all by myself down at this empty beach wouldn't pose too much of a risk. Anyway, what I wanted to do was to have another go at the image that I used my phone for last week, but with my proper equipment, to see if I can do something slightly more interesting. Now, the thing about this sort of image, you see behind me, it's an absolutely spectacular sweeping view. It looks fantastic, but it can be really, really difficult to capture something like that. And so what I'm going to try and do is to find myself some foreground and some interest, and also some way of framing the view, maybe looking down between some rocks or something like that, so that yes, I want to capture the far distant horizon with a fabulous profile of the mountains. There's some quite nice detail in the sky. It's not a bright sunny day. In fact, the light is just perfect. The tide's coming in fast. And so hopefully I can make use of those elements to bring together a seascape image that contains all sorts of interest and says, hey, this is what the coast of Wales looks like in springtime. Well, I think I've found something here. I've come down a little bit from the headland where I spoke to you earlier because I wanted to take advantage of these rocks to find some foreground. I've sort of got the place to myself. There's one heron and 3 walkers right down the far end of the beach. I kind of don't mind them being here, not because they're going to be any problem at all as far as my photograph is concerned. When I make that, I'll simply clone them out if I don't like them in it. But a place like this, on a day like this, really should have people here to enjoy it. And that was kind of the sad thing that I felt about it last weekend when I was just here with my phone. The fact that it was a bank holiday weekend, and under normal circumstances there'd be families having a really nice day out, and it just seems such a pity. Well, I think I've found a composition that achieves what I'm after, but it's required me to kind of mangle my tripod into the rocks, and it's literally just balanced there. I was a bit worried about it supporting the camera, so I don't want to leave it there too long just in case. But what I've done with this shot is I've used some of these lovely sea pinks that are everywhere around here at this time of year, also known as thrift. Lovely little pink flowers, and they grow in some huge clumps. But what I've got here is just a little bunch of them, maybe 10 or 12 of them, in the foreground of my image, sitting on a lip of rock that forms the very bottom part of the composition. And by getting my camera right in close to them, hopefully I can really create some depth in the shot and give an idea of what an epic view it is. Now, I've also got another bank of rock immediately behind them, but that rock is quite dark, which is perfect because it allows the colour of the thrift to show up against that dark background. Then I've got the river estuary as it runs out across in front of the outcrop that I'm standing on. I've polarized that, but not completely, because if I polarize it to the full extent that my filter will go, you can't see the water at all. So I do want a little bit of reflection on it. Then I've got this lovely sandbank that runs out in front with some really nice shapes at the moment. And then of course the backdrop of the mountains of Snowdonia, Nantler Ridge and the Llŷn Peninsula. So I've used 4 shots for this, focused on the sea pinks, the dark rock, the estuary outlet and the infinity of the horizon. I've also got some quite nice texture in the sky, so to preserve that I've used a 0.9 soft grad. So it's going to be a 4-image focus stack to make sure that it's sharp all the way through. But I really like the shapes that the tide as it comes in is making around these sandbars. So it's not just a flat slab of sand with a line of surf. It's got some interest in the mid-ground. Well, I think I've got everything I need for that image. Plenty of exposures to go back and work with, not just at different focus points, but also different exposure values. It's not a difficult day, but there is a reasonably high dynamic range. And of course, because I'm shooting with a micro four thirds camera, I do find that it's slightly less forgiving. So by taking a number of exposures, exactly the same focus and composition, but at slightly different exposure values, it means I can pick the one that I think is going to work best when I start blending together to give a final image. Anyway, I think I've got about a quarter of an hour or so left before I really should be heading back. So I might just pop down to these rocks as the tide's coming in, just see if I can find anything, a bit of detail to work with, and see if I can get anything else while I'm here. But if you follow my channel for any length of time, you may have seen me do this sort of thing before, up and down this coastline. I find myself a composition and then I just wait it out. The light is changing because the clouds are moving across the sun, but also we've got a flood tide, which means it's gradually covering these rocks. Now there isn't a lot of movement in the sea today, but by setting up my composition and spending 15-20 minutes taking 30 or 40 exposures, I can blend those together in post to give me one image that's got plenty going on in it. I'm shooting at 12mm, not necessarily because I want to be that wide, but because that gives me flexibility in post to crop in. I've got a 6-stop filter on, obviously with a polarizer and a grad as well. The reason for the 6-stop is that I want to get my shutter speed as slow as I can without getting into the realms of smoothing it all out, because I want to smudge the foam as it comes in around the rocks. I'm using my remote shutter so that I can just fire it off as a wave comes in that looks interesting, and it means I'm not touching the camera while I'm doing that. Obviously I'm not going to focus stack this, so I've just focused in about 1/3 of the way in. It'll be fine. I know that the mountains are going to be soft in the far distance, but that's not really what this image is about, and there's just going to be a little line of them along the top of the image, I think. But yeah, so I'm shooting, as I said, at a second, and that's giving me the sort of movement in the water that I'm looking for. What I like about this particular composition is this little inlet and a finger of rock. Now the rock around here is very liberally covered in seaweed, but just this one small area, it's all barnacles, and they give it a really lovely golden tone with the sunlight on them, nice texture, and so those are what I much prefer shooting than all that messy bladder wrack. Well, you know, every time I step outside my front door, I can't help but look across to the mainland and those rather fabulous mountains. I'm going to be locked down for at least another 2 weeks before I can even think about it, and even then it just remains to see how things pan out. But as a substitute for being able to take my tent up onto a ridge, living somewhere like this, really, it's not too bad at all, so I shouldn't feel too hard done by. So just a couple of images today, hopefully reasonably interesting when I get back and take a look at them. I've certainly enjoyed myself, but it's now time for me to clock out. I did just want to say before I go though, that I know that over the last few weeks my videos have been a little bit makeshift perhaps, so thank you for bearing with me. I really appreciate it. I've tried hopefully to still carry on with a little bit of photography, something just to hopefully entertain you, even if only briefly, while you've been locked down. And of course, if you've been able to get out and about this weekend, I really hope you're having as good a time as I am right now. So I'll leave it there for this one. Thank you ever so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, why not subscribe now and join me next time. Cheers.